Welcome to the Inside Pitch. I'm Christopher Lockhart, the creator and administrator of this Facebook group where screenwriters, creatives, filmmakers meet to ask and answer questions and exchange ideas and information on the craft and business of movie making. I am joined, as always, by my co-administrator and co-host of these broadcasts, the always well-groomed Ramesh Santanam.
Really? Look at this.
So handsome, Ramesh. What can I say?
How are you, Chris?
I am doing quite well, and it's going to be interesting today because we're doing something that we've never done before.
Right.
We're bringing we're going to do like a lecture almost, sort of.
Yep.
We did our panel on screenwriting contests, which of course anybody can watch on our YouTube channel. But this is different because one of our members, who is a screenwriter, has written a book based on the very well-known Save the Cat screenwriting book, only this is for television. I'm doing a very bad job improvising, and you're going to be doing the introduction in a moment anyway.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about how Save the Cat and its dramatic principles can be applied to your television script. So if you have TV scripts, you're thinking about a pilot, let's face it, TV is kind of where it's at right now. Even all the biggest names, all the A-listers who many years ago would never even consider going near TV, whether that be directors, writers, or actors, now everybody wants a piece of it. So I think it's wise for all writers, even if you're a feature writer, I think it's wise to have a TV pilot in your portfolio just to diversify. So I think this could be really helpful. Have you ever read, are you familiar with the Save the Cat books?
Yes and no. I mean, I know a little bit about it. And I've read enough about Save the Cat, but I've actually not read Save the Cat.
Ramesh, I am so. How can you be a co-host of this today, having never read the Save the Cat books? There's no excuse. However, if it makes you feel any better, I have also never read any of the books. I do have the Save the Cat book.
Really?
It is at my office with all my other screenwriting books locked up because of the pandemic. Screenwriting books, how-to screenwriting books, this is not a new phenomenon. This goes way back. I have a collection. My first book goes back to 1910. So they have been writing how-to books. They used to do correspondence courses. The Palmer Company put out a screenwriting correspondence course in the 1920s. So these books are very popular, but it was really Sid Field, whose book Screenplay, I believe, really sort of revolutionized the idea of this.
And that was, I remember reading that one, good grief, 30 years ago, maybe?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, sure, absolutely. It was written probably in the 70s. I mean, it used Chinatown and Silver Streak, as its.
I love Silver Streak.
Yeah, it's a fun movie. So, and although there have been millions of these books, there's really only been a few that have been sort of touchstones. William Goldman's book, which is not really a how-to screenwriting book, it's more about his adventures in the screen trade, but it certainly motivated a lot of screenwriters. Sid Field's book, of course, was, I think, very instrumental. Robert McKee's bloated book Story, of course. And then Blake Snyder wrote Save the Cat, which I really became a very, very popular book, and is probably one of the most popular screenwriting book brands around.
Yeah, I'm not, other than Sid Field's, when it first came out, I remember sort of going through it because at that time, I didn't know how to write a treatment, and so I used his sort of thing to use it. And honestly, the only other book I've read cover to cover is our friend Bill Martell's The Secrets of Action Screenwriting.
Yeah, and Bill, of course, has written a lot of various books on screenwriting. In fact, he even took one of those old screenwriting books by Anita Loos and sort of translated, I believe, to kind of, modern screen language.
Right.
So go Bill Martell.
Yes,
But we
he's
don't
great.
have Bill Martell here today. We
No.
have Jamie Nash
Nash.
here, and he's like, why are you talking about Bill Martell? He's like, screw Bill Martell. So why don't you introduce Jamie, and let's get our show on the road.
Okay. Jamie Nash is the author of Save the Cat, Writes for TV. He's written and sold almost every type of story under the sun, including horror films, Exists, VHS2, The Night Watchman, Altered, and Lovely Molly, and the family films Santa Hunters and Tiny Christmas. Jamie, welcome.
Welcome, Jamie.
Hi, I made it. Oh, we're
go
doing
to that screen because you said that you like that screen better. So we're going to do this screen.
I tend to move around, so I think I'd be like off the screen or something. I saw Rosenberg did that a week ago too. He was
I know.
Screen. He wasn't good at
staying on camera. He had a hard time staying. No, he wasn't. He should never direct. I'm just going to go because I'm wondering what what this looks like if you're looking at it on a phone. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if, but I don't know, but for some reason I'm not even. Are we live? I mean,
yes, we are live.
It's Facebook Live. So this is part of the show. This is part of the.
Can people see us?
Oh,
yes. Okay.
Okay. Good.
Make sure everybody can see us. Just say hello to everybody. I want to say hello, of course, to all of our members who are tuning in, and of course, we want to give a shout out to Steve Enlow, our co-administrator of the Inside Pitch. Yep, it looks like people can see and hear us, which is good. And some people are throwing out various books, like Chris Vogler's book. Yes, absolutely a touchstone in the book thing. But Blake Snyder, Jamie, the late Blake Snyder, certainly sort of he left his legacy on Hollywood screenwriting with Save the Cat. So what can you just sort of tell us about Save the Cat? Why did Blake Snyder want to write that book? And what does Save the Cat contribute to this canon that doesn't already exist? Because let's face it, a lot of these books, with all due respect, a lot of these books just say the same thing. Absolutely. They just brand it differently, so it's like one book calls it this and one book calls it that, but it's really all the same thing. So what does Save the Cat bring to the table that hasn't been at the table before? Yeah.
That's a good question. And just to give you I'll give you a backstory on why I wrote this book and how I came to Save the Cat too. I actually, when I was coming up, it was the early 2000s, and all I had was like Word Player, with Rossio and Elliot's website. William Martell's book, I read that cover to cover. I'm a big William Martell fan. Two Adverbs, this weird website that I think was later in the years, but I think I was
Two Adverbs.
Two Adverbs, Artful Writer, which was Mason's original site. I was into all those things. I was into the internet. By the way, I'm in Maryland, by the way. So I'm in this weird zone where I get all my screenwriting advice through the internet for the most part, and all my interaction and all my network, except when I visit, which I haven't done during COVID. So anyway, in 2004-ish, Blake Snyder and I met through an online screenwriting group. And he actually asked me to write a screenplay with him pre-Save the Cat. And during those days, he was using and you asked, why did he write this book? He had come off like a string of spec screenplays. Infamously, everybody likes to joke, "Stop or my mom will shoot," which I think somebody rewrote, but I don't think he still takes credit for it. By the way, I think I looked it up last time. It made worldwide $80 million or something. So "Stop or my mom will shoot." Blank Check, I think, was his other one for Disney. And then he sold like a spec to Steven Spielberg. He sold a spec to another spec to Disney. And he was working on that Herbie movie that Lindsay Lohan ultimately starred in. And it was rewritten, and he didn't get any, he didn't get the credit for it. But I think he had the idea, like Herbie goes to NASCAR. So he had gone through all that gauntlet, maybe 15 years or so. And I think he really craved the kind of interaction that, Chris, you do on this site. For whatever reason, you're a glutton for punishment. he craved that interaction. Maybe he had a bit of the teacher gene, and he really just wanted to reach out to people. I think that's why he reached out to me, a young screenwriter, to write a script with. We wrote a script back then. He was using all these techniques and using all these labels, even for himself, for his own process. And I just assumed this was the way Hollywood did it back then. I was a big hero's journey person. I had read Robert McGee. I had done all that stuff, but he was throwing around all these new terms and new ideas. And I just assumed they were close enough to the Robert McGee stuff and things that I just assumed that's how it was done. So anyway, and then in 2007, he wrote his book. He put these ideas in a book. It came out. It was very much an underdog book. Like right now, my book is constantly second to his for the last few weeks, and I can't get over the hump. Like it's still #1. It's still selling more copies than any screenwriting book out there. Easily so. It never comes off. I beat it for like a week or so, and I was happy. And I hope after this, I'm sure I'll pass it because everybody on the Inside Pitch will go out and buy it. So his book in 2007, it was an underground book. It wasn't like this huge juggernaut right out of the gate. It was just another screenwriting book. And then he died suddenly in 2009, just when it was starting to get some momentum. And then fast forward to today. I mean, I was loath. I would almost say never mention the Save the Cat terms or anything like that in a meeting with, if you went to a general meeting or a pitch or anything. But I've since then, in the last couple of years, and I've done a ton of generals, especially during the COVID season, I did a whole bunch. People are quoting Save the Cat back to me, not even knowing that I'm a Save the Cat person. So the language has infiltrated these ranks, and it makes sense because a lot of these people probably read the book in college. So that's a intro to your question. What did Save the Cat add that was new? Here's the thing, most people, and this is, if you want to bring up the slides, I kind of anticipated this question. I'm not sure if you can bring up those slides at the moment. Okay, flip down to the next one. It's probably two down. Let me see. I don't even remember what I put in these slides, so. Okay, yeah, that's the one. So in 2007, when you wrote this book, a lot of people think the book is just that 15 beat sheet. That thing that everybody says, is the book, and you can find it out there. And I'll go into that in another slide. But the reality of that book, for me, is he was doing something that Chris, I teach college students screenwriting, and I share your logline document with them. First class, I teach that. I think that is so important. I actually think it's one of the most important things. Like the #1 thing I see students do wrong is they don't get that logline straight before they start writing. And almost every student, when they pitch me their script, they're like, do you need, will you read my script? And I'm like, what's your logline? And I can usually give them all the feedback they need just from the logline. And I'm sure you know that. I've watched you do your logline stuff here, and I see that. So in the first day of my class, I teach basically the same thing you're doing, and Blake had that in his 2007 book. That was his first chapter. It was loglines, hero, goal, obstacle, stakes. He called it story DNA. He said, yeah, come up with this before you write your script. Very similar to your 10-page document. I don't know why I'm saying 10 pages. Is your document 10 pages? Your PDF? It might be 20.
Like 40.
No, it's
40 or 50.
It's pretty, it's like, let me tell you, I have a lot of nerve calling Robert McKee bloated. Let's just say that was the pot calling the kettle black.
No, but I send your, it shows you, maybe I don't read your PDF that much. I read it back in the beginning, but I send it to all my students, anybody who asks about loglines.
By the way, make sure that you have the most recent one. And let me just say for anybody in the group that if you go to the Files tab at the top of the group page, you'll find the logline document in there. It's readily available to everybody. You just have to scroll down and look for it.
Okay, awesome. And or you can buy Blake Snyder's original book or my book, which also starts out with the very similar logline treatise. And I do it in a lot less pages apparently than Chris. So, Buy my book.
That's why you're a real writer.
That's right. I pared it down, and it has a lot more stupid dad jokes in there as well. So you can mix in that as well. So his first chapter starts out with story DNA, log lines. Then he goes into this thing that's also very popular among Save the Cat people, the 10 story genres. And this is very similar to, I can't never remember this name. There's a few other people have done this, like archetype stories, like the 30 stories or something. I think Politi or something. Yeah. There's
Pulte.
Pulte.
I think it was Pulte. Yeah.
Yeah, and that his are just, they have better handles. They're easier to understand, and there's only 10 of them. Where I think George Pulte's were like 30 or 40 or something. Yeah, and I think they're honestly, I think George's. I used to use them before I started using Blake's. I think his are less useful. I think Blake really did a good job. And some people read the book and they go, I don't like the 15 beats. I don't like all those other tips, but I love these story genres. So different people get different things out of Save the Cat. Some people say never use the story beats, but those story genres are awesome. Some people skip right over the story genres and go right to the 15 beats. The 15 beats, they're very similar to what you find in Truby. It's an expansion. Sid Fields, I read Sid too. That was the first book I read. I think I read it in high school. And Sid's taught me the basics, but his is so high level. Like, he doesn't really tell you as much what to do in Act 2. He just says, you know, there's a setup, there's a confrontation, there's a third act.
Well, Sid Field actually amended his book because originally it was 3 acts, and then he realized that perhaps in his first book he didn't really tackle Act 2 as well as he could have, and then in his second book he divided Act 2 into 2 parts.
The 2 parts, yeah. And honestly, Save the Cat does the same in every screenwriting book, unless they're trying to promote some 8-act structure, but even those kind of just divide the other things. Save the Cat definitely is that 4-act structure, I'd say, that divides at the midpoint. In Sid's book, if I remember right, the big thing he added was like pinch points. He did these pinch point things.
Plot points, he called them. Yeah.
Well, pinch points were the midpoints of your 2-act. Anyway, it's like a goofy thing where he divided the 2-act, and then he had these things called pinch points.
Some people call those mini plot points.
Yeah,
also.
Exactly. Yeah. And the funny thing, before Blake came about, that's what I was doing. I was putting midpoints in those sections just so I could get my head around what I was doing. Sequence method kind of does that too. That the mini movie method, it kind of breaks it up and chops it all up. As you can see, I'm like a geek for this kind of stuff. So I love all this stuff.
Chris Soth did the, I believe, right?
Yep,
wasn't it Chris Soth who sort of did that, that mini movie?
Supposedly used at USC heavily for a time, but it depends on the professor. But yeah, and I've used all these methods different days when I wake up. It just depends on how I felt back in the day. But the 15 beats, Blake's 15 beats, he was aware of all these things. You know, again, it's nothing brand new. Here are the couple things I'd say he added to the mix for me, having been a geek with all this stuff, and especially at the time, I think I was using Hero's Journey. So he kind of, here are the things I got from his. He kind of added these opening and closing images, which are these bookend kind of things that he did. With a before and after picture, which I'm not sure that I was aware of from the other things. I'm not sure. Maybe Truby's might have hit on that a little bit. He called the denial of the call in Hero's Journey, he called that the debate, and he further clarified it in a way that I found very useful. So in that sense, there's a catalyst for people that sort of, and I'll go through a little bit of this later. But there's a catalyst. There's that thing that the lightning bolt hits somebody, the magic happens, the rom-com, 2 people meet. And then there's this section where the hero doesn't want to do that thing or can't do it or something. You know, infamously, like Luke Skywalker, he gets, you know, we have to go on this quest. He's like, I can't do it. I always say he has to make blue milk, but it's moisture farming. I want him to make blue milk. So he sits around and he says, no, no, no. And then something happens that pushes him to make the choice to go on the quest. He had this debate section so that he further explored. That was one of the nuances that I took from his. He also had this fun and games section. He called it the fun and games. And this was the part I think Syd Field was missing for me, was he basically said that fun and games, it's the movie you came to see. It's the promise of the premise. It's the trailer moments. And that was the first part of Act Two. The second part of Act Two, he calls the bad guys close in. And it was just good terminology. It helped me out. It helped me move over a hump where I realized that's when the tension really starts to clamp down on somebody. And it's kind of like, it's analogous to the fun and games, just more tension, more focus, more stakes is what the bad guys close in. And I think All Is Lost is something I hadn't really seen in a lot of the other books, but I'm sure it was always there. But that All Is Lost moment, that big, you know, page 75 of your 100-pager or whatever, that's the moment where the worst possible thing happens to the hero. And that was sort of new to me, or at least the term hit me. And honestly, some of this stuff was the terms he used just hit people with a better understanding. I've seen people also say that terms actually confuse them because they were used to other terms. But for me, these terms, these simple terms, these simple handles that I could remember, and I basically memorized right off the bat, were very useful to me.
You know, the all is lost moment, if I may interrupt, the all is lost moment, which usually occurs at the end of the second act, the way that I like to explain it is, because your character has been pursuing a goal, right? Your character's on a mission. And the all is lost moment puts your character the farthest possible distance from achieving the goal. He's actually farther away from achieving the goal now than he was at midpoint. Right. So it literally appears as if the character will not be able to solve the goal. So like in The Wizard of Oz, she finally meets the wizard and she's ready to go home. He's like, no, I got some news for you. You need to go kill the Wicked Witch. She's like, what? So that's an all is lost moment. And then the character comes back and formulates a new plan to achieve the goal. And of course, a lot of writers struggle with that moment because they never gave their character a goal to begin with.
That's right. That's right. So it's funny that you say that. So first of all, the way you just described it is pretty much how Blake describes it in his book.
Look at this, me and Blake. I just hope I live a little longer than Blake. I'm sorry, Blake.
Yeah, no worries. He hopes you do too, I'm sure. So but the funny thing you say about it is my reinterpretation of Blake Snyder, and maybe it's because I was a two adverbs person, you know. I do it all around that hero goal obstacle stakes. Like this whole thing, I'm constantly looking at it through that logline sheen, you know. So for me, the break into two, when you start Act Two, is when the hero goal obstacle and stakes all slot together. And the fun and games for me, the way I interpret it, like Blake said, trailer moments and all this, but the way I interpret it, it's the hero trying to accomplish the goal with the obstacle in the way. Like that's all you know, the hero is out in the mission, trying to do the goal. The thing is in the way. The midpoint raised the stakes on that. The All Is Lost does exactly what you say. It feels like that goal will never be achieved. So I've kind of, myself, when I read Save the Cat, I find that logline thing that you do here, and that's why I hang out here, honestly. I kind of pay attention to what people are doing. I find it so important. I can't tell everybody how important I feel that is. And it filters into all of my view of Save the Cat and how it works, and even how you can turn your stories into hero-driven stories as opposed to plot. You know, people look at Save the Cat and say, oh, well, then you got to do a midpoint and it's plot and this and that. And it sort of is, but I view it as the hero keeps trying to accomplish that goal, and you're throwing these obstacles and raising stakes on them. And then you see how your unique hero responds to those things. And that's what makes character. So anyway, that's my two adverbs plug. Is it still out there? Is the blog out there? I don't know.
It was a private group. It was it was a website, and it was really the precursor to what we do here on the Inside Pitch. Yeah, it's great.
Okay, that's cool. I guess I was in there then. I don't know. I must have been, because I certainly know it like the back of my hand. Yeah. Okay, so by the way, don't go looking for two adverbs. It's like a 2006 blog something, right? It's some kind of.
No, it's probably
up
still.
there?
It's some. I'm sure it's still there. Yeah.
It's on MySpace or something.
No. It's like an actual website.
Oh, really?
So
you can get all the. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm going to turn this into a two adverbs discussion. It's going to be retro. So that's the 15 beats in a nutshell, which I think I have on a further slide, but just stick with this for a second. On top of that, and by the way, this is all intro to my book because I took Blake's book and adapted all these things for television as best I could and added a lot more. So the other thing he did was the board, which the board was this thing he did to me when I wrote a script with him. There was this thing he called it to me, like he just threw it out there like I know what he was talking about. He said, okay, I think we're ready. We have the beats. Let's do a 10-20-10. I was like, oh, okay. I guess everybody in Hollywood. And I pretended like I knew because I was some young screenwriter. And he just made this thing up. But he throws the jargon out like, let's do a 10-20-10. A 10-20-10 was note cards. It was just note cards on an index board. Like he didn't invent note cards on an index board. But his unique wrinkle was the 10-20-10. And all a 10-20-10 was 10 cards for Act 1, 20 cards for Act 2, 10 cards for Act 3. That's all it is. So that's a 10-20-10. And that was our next step when we wrote that script together. We did the index cards. We made a 10-20-10. We put them on a board. We moved them around. We ripped them up. We did all that stuff. His first book has insights on how to do that, things to think about. He also did some things that are very McGee similar. Like he put little notation in the cards, one for what's the conflict in the card, and another it's basically similar to Robert McGee's value change, the plus minus system. He has something like that. He calls it the emotional change of the scene. And he adds those to the cards as well. And this is all carried over again in my book for TV, as we'll talk about in a couple minutes. So other tips, then he had these other tips too. And the only reason I'm saying this is because a lot of people think Blake Snyder Save the Cat is just the beat sheet, but it's all this stuff. So the other tips, which honestly to me were the most fun when I read them, these were the things like the Save the Cat moment. And Save the Cat moment, if you don't know, it's just a scene where a hero kind of shows that they're worth rooting for somewhere early in your script. And it literally could be like they're a rotten person, but then they save a cat and so you like them. Back in Blake's day, like he was writing around the time of like Liar, Liar and things like that. So I think that's a good example. That guy's a jerk. Like Jim Carrey's a real jerk, but he's nice to his kid, or something. It's like, so you're kind of like, oh, okay. Yeah.
I'm sorry. One of my favorite examples is from Sea of Love.
That's in Blake's book, actually.
Oh my God, you're kidding me.
No, it's in his book.
God, I'm like plagiarizing, but listen, it's great.
No, it's the best one. You pointed out the best one.
Yeah. I mean, it is a great scene. So if you haven't seen Sea of Love, watch that opening, watch how it introduces the Al Pacino character. But the other thing that it does is while we love him for it, it also sets up a flaw.
Yes.
In the character as well. So it's quite clever. Richard Price's script. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you haven't watched it, it's on YouTube. I show it to my students every year. So go Google it. You can go Google a pirated copy of, but that scene, just do Save the Cat, Sea of Love. Go check it out now. Or don't check it out now. You're listening to me. So other tips, you might have heard double mumbo jumbo. Double mumbo jumbo is this idea that you can't have two magics in the same script. Now, the funny thing is he predated superhero movies and they have tons of magic, but I think it's a good rule if you're not writing a genre that obviously the point of it is to have several different magics in one script. You had this thing called the Pope in the Pool, which is really just like an expositional idea that when you're giving long exposition, maybe put something crazy or interesting visually in the background. And he has all these different tips like that with little handles that people remember.
Double mumbo jumbo is actually good. I refer to it as two tricks. Other people will often say it's two hats, and but often it's sort of translated as a script that has almost two concepts.
Yeah,
and they are competing against each other. and it actually ends up crashing the screenplay rather than allowing it to soar.
You find this in, you know, I've seen you do your logline thing, and you see people in their loglines that have this, and it's just like, you know, is it, and a lot of times they're disconnected. It's like they think throwing two things in. I think it's a great rule. It's one of those that gets, it gets some shade because of the superhero movies. Like people make a joke like, well, I guess you can't have Doctor Strange and Thanos in the same movie then. And that's a very unique universe.
Yeah, but you know something? You know. To me, I wouldn't consider that to be two tricks, you know, at all, actually. And especially the way it's done in those movies, because those movies are, believe it or not, you know, the Marvel movies are really they're really well written. They're amazingly well constructed.
Yeah.
So so I've not encountered that in a Marvel movie. I tend to see it more in amateur scripts.
Yeah.
You know?
I think in a Marvel movie, the reason they totally get away with it is because Iron Man might have not had magic. But then the next movie built on Iron Man's world and added another layer and another layer. And eventually you get to this whole universe of things. So it did a great job.
Thing. Right. Yeah. It's a universe. Right.
It's a universe of things.
And they support each other.
Right. Right.
In that regard. Yeah.
Yeah. So it'd be kind of like if you came up with the original Harry Potter and then had a UFO show up, it's kind of that thing. That's double mumbo jumbo. So anyway, and you can flip this slide now. That's it in a nutshell. And since then, there's been a whole series of books. The ones that are probably the most popular right now, besides mine is, you know, go buy mine, make mine popular, of course. Is Save the Cat Writes a Novel is very popular right now. I write novels too, and I'm in a writing group. And I can say, well, if anybody here wants to be a novel writer, we do have an advantage over the novel writers in that we do pay attention to structure. Like it's almost structure and plot sometimes are almost derided in the novel world. And that's why this Save the Cat Writes a Novel, so many novelists have taken that and just run with it over the last few years, because that's kind of the part that a lot of novelists are missing. I mean, a lot of screenwriters are missing it too, but especially in the novel world, they need it. And it's a really well-written book. Up until my book came out, I would say, I used to tell people that if you were interested in getting Save the Cat, even if you were a screenwriter, you might want to skip to Save the Cat Writes a Novel or pick that up too with Save the Cat, because while it is written for novelists, it's the same thing. It's the same structure. It would teach you everything you needed from Save the Cat and Save the Cat Writes the Novel. It might not have as many dad jokes, but it's pretty well written. And it's the evolution of Save the Cat to an extent is in Save the Cat Writes a Novel.
Jamie, are you the first author other than Blake Snyder to pen one of these Save the Cat books?
No, because Save the Cat Writes a Novel is Jessica Brody. She wrote that one.
It's a little small for me here on the screen.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So, and that one just came out a couple years ago. So it's maybe 2 or 3 years old. And like I said, very, very popular. Very popular book. The other ones, just super quick. Strikes Back was his third book. It just kind of added on. It was like almost other musings that he had. It went deeper into character and theme, and it had some I don't know, like business advice, and it just had all kinds of other stuff. And it's a really good read, and a lot of people like it. But it's not as much like I can say, oh, it talks about log lines or something. It's like a big collection of stuff. Save the Cat Goes to the Movies. So Save the Cat and Save the Cat Goes to the Movies were almost like a 1-2 punch. You'd almost buy them together, because Save the Cat Goes to the Movies broke down movies using the Save the Cat methods. That's what it did. So it was a companion piece. I think Sid Field did something similar with his books. He wrote his first book, and then he wrote like a companion that broke down 3 movies. Save the Cat Goes to the Movies breaks down several movies. Like, I don't know, it might be 20 or something. Save the Cat Goes to the Indies is sort of this underrated book of the group. it's just really well written, and it does a lot of what Save the Cat Goes to the Movies does, but specifically for indie movies, specifically for movies that honestly, when I tell my students, I'm like, when my students raise their hand and say, well, what about Moonlight, right?
Yeah.
I go, well, Moonlight, and this is in Robert McGee terms, I say that's mini plot. This is arch plot, so I focus on the Aristotelian storytelling methods, the setup payoff, the catharsis, all that. A lot of the indie movies like Moonlight or something, Nomadland, they're after something different. And while I think there's a lot of value to reading Save the Cat to make those movies, because you can read like what the Aristotelian thing is, and then you can kind of peel it away. I honestly, usually in my classes, when they say, what's Moonlight? I say, that's just a different thing. Learn this method and then apply what you need to the other thing you're doing. But anyway, Indies does a really good job of going where I typically wouldn't go with my students. Like it goes to those places. It tries to figure them out. And last but not least, there's just a collection of Blake's blogs that came out. I think that one came out probably shortly after he passed. They just collected some things and turned it into a book. And that's all the Save the Cat books. If you can flip the slide. Okay, these are the beats. We kind of already did a super rough pass, but on the next slide, this is the icons for the beats. I don't know why I threw this in. I think it's a pretty picture. This one's probably better. So just super quick. I kind of already did this at a high level, but just super quick, I'll go over the beats. And I'm just basically going to read them and give a little further elaboration if you have any questions. So the first beat is the opening image, and this is assuming a 110-page script. That's kind of the assumption that Blake had in the original. These are the beats. This is the 15 beats. And basically, you'd use these almost in a fill-in-the-blank kind of thing to outline your script. And that's really the heart of Save the Cat. So the first beat's the opening image. That's on page 1. Page 2, which was another beat that kind of opened my eyes a little bit, it's almost an on-the-nose kind of theme stated. And depending on what kind of movie you're making, like in Pixar movies, it is rock solid on the nose. Like they say the theme. And he put this on page 5. But I actually, in my book, I say it floats. It floats all over the place. And by the way, I should say one of the things Blake did in his book, he put these numbers, like Catalyst is always on page 12. And that's another one of these things people kind of knock. It's like, don't read that book. Just because your Catalyst isn't on page 12 doesn't mean it's a bad script. And I'm of the belief that that's true. I mean, I've written Catalyst on page 15 and page 12. But here's why I'll tell you. I'm going to try to explain Blake a little bit here, because I actually had this debate with him once. And I learned this now that I teach. Now that I teach, I learned if you don't say put it on page 12, it'll be on page 75. That's just the way it is. If you don't say you have to do it this way, people will do it anyway. If you say you can leave out a Catalyst, if you say you can leave out a debate, it's not that instructive. So it's almost... I feel like Blake almost got didactic. If you knew him, he wasn't didactic at all. He was very inclusive. He had lots of ideas. He was very creative. But he really wanted to help people focus. So he wanted to say, don't worry about this stuff. I'm the one that's going to tell you. You just supply the creativity. You supply the authenticity. You supply the heroes. You supply the characters. Just put it on page 12. Don't debate it. Put it on page 12. And so some of the people that hate Save the Cat hate it for that reason. Don't hate it for that reason. Just know why he did it. I hate that people hate it for that reason, because that's.
By the way, I remember that there was a New York Times article that was deriding Save the Cat.
Yes, it was like, this is the reason we have superhero movies. Even though 90% of those superhero movie people probably have never read Save the Cat. I think there's kind of a myth that and honestly, the Save the Cat people would love if it were true that it was being used in Kevin Feige and stuff like that. I don't think it's infiltrated that deeply, at least not yet. Maybe 10 years from now, maybe when the kids come up, maybe after they read my book, it'll infiltrate that deeper. So the other thing I always say to that, like, the two last podcasts I heard of people say, I use Save the Cat in a professional level. I think a lot of people don't say it, but the two last ones, I think the guy who did Wreck-It Ralph did it, which is obvious. You know, it's got theme stated, page 5, it's got Catalyst, it's got Pixar movies are rock solid with this stuff. I mean, they follow this stuff so tightly. But then the other one was Dallas Buyers Club. Okay. And if you can compare Wreck-It Ralph and Dallas Buyers Club and see the formula and say that's the reason all movies are superhero movies, more power to you, because it's really what you bring to it. This is just some tool, and then you're going to bring the authenticity and the magic. This isn't going to make you creative. It's not going to give you story ideas. It's not going to teach you how to do like what Scott Rosenberg we talked about last week, like tell great jokes and be creative. And it's just going to help pull that story out of you. I always view Save the Cat as a writing partner. Like it's like that annoying writing partner. It's saying, you know, Catalyst really has to be on page 12. And I'm like, okay, I guess I got to satisfy this idiot, you know, writing partner.
But it's tools, you know, I like that analogy. And you could give a carpenter's toolbox to two different people, the same exact toolbox, and one is going to build a rickety fort and the other can build a beautiful home. So much of it is about the carpenter, in this case, the writer. So you need to animate and activate these tools in an effective way.
Yes. And I don't like, you read a lot of scripts, but when I was first, you know, starting, I really learned to screenwrite by reading bad scripts. I mean, it might not be the best way to learn to write screenplays, but I was so annoyed and so frustrated by the bad ones. And what most of them did was that break into two. This is just an example. And I didn't have the language then to know this is what was going on. But that break into two didn't happen to page 60. You know, so I was like, what is this story about? Why am I reading this script? And it didn't show up to page 60. Or maybe the catalyst didn't show up to page 40. So I was like, it's just all set up. I don't know what's going on. I'm reading. It's set up. Or maybe they spent too much time somewhere and the ending was rushed. It was 2 pages or 3 pages. So while these numbers and stuff might seem didactic and things, they really indicate there is kind of like a note behind the note with those numbers. And it is a problem, at least when I was coming up, I saw in lots of bad screenplays that were poorly structured. But the words that come out aren't, when I was doing this and didn't have the language, I would just say it's boring. It didn't hook me, you know, and these were really, now I'd say, oh, your catalyst isn't to page 40, or you don't have a catalyst, or you don't have a midpoint, or whatever I'd say. Anyway, sorry to get off on that. Catalyst, page 12. So the debate we talked about, it's kind of the denial of the call. It goes from 12 to 25 in the sheet. Break into two, like I said, that's kind of the moment where there's this catalyst that happens, then the break into two. So Luke Skywalker goes back, his aunt and uncle are killed. He's like, okay, I'll go on the mission because there's nothing left. The stormtroopers have closed in. He has to go on the mission. So he accepts the goal that in the log line. There's this B story beat, and I really like Jessica Brody, the novel person, came up with a nuance with it. A lot of times what the B story beat is, it's when a mentor character becomes more important. It's when somebody from the beginning, like Mr. Miyagi, this might be like the scene after he saves Daniel-san and does the karate against Cobra Kai. And then he kind of sits with him and you realize, okay, this is the love story of this movie. And a B story is often the love story. So those characters sometimes are introduced in the setup, but a lot of times at this beat, they get more important. And the B story is sprinkled throughout the beats. Fun and games, we talked about, it's the hero pursuing the goal, obstacles in the way, oftentimes has trailer moments and all that stuff. The midpoint is a stake raiser. The bad guys close in because the stakes are raised, the noose tightens, personal stakes get higher, personal tension gets higher. All is lost, that worst thing that can happen, often accompanied by a death of a mentor like Obi-Wan Kenobi or somebody like that. Dark Night of the Soul is kind of the wallowing point after that, the kind of sadness. A lot of times it's raining in those scenes. A lot of times, you know, there's kind of soul searching. A new idea comes up. That's the break into three. This is what Chris articulated earlier. I mean, spot on. And then the finale, there's Blake has other things about the finale. He has this thing called the 5-point finale, which I won't go into today, but it can expand. If you're ever wondering what to do in a finale, look up his 5-point finale. Just Google it. It's really useful just to help you brainstorm and pull ideas out of you for the finale. And then last but not least, the final image. By the way, I bolded the ones that were single scene beats. The ones that aren't bolted, well, with the exception of theme stated, maybe, are they're usually multi-scene beats, and you can kind of see by the dashes, 30 to 55 is fun and games, where midpoint is it's on page 55, and it's a scene, but they're single scene beats as opposed to multi-scene beats. Okay, so if you want to flip slides, I don't know what's coming up. I can't remember. Okay, my book. There we go. My book. Yeah, we're finally there after all that. And my book is an adaptation.
And that's all the time that we have today. So
that would be great. That'd be great. Because then they have to buy the book because I won't say anything about it. Now I can only screw it up. So my book is an adaptation of Save the Cat. Why don't you flip to the next slide? Because otherwise I might say what is on there. So here's the, I guess I didn't need that. That's the next slide, but you can leave it up. So let me tell you what my book's focused on, just as a FYI. My book, the intention, I kind of wrote it for inside pitch type folks. And I know that's a big range and a big spectrum, but it's people that have probably already dabbled in screenwriting, people that have probably read some of these books. Because to me, Save the Cat writes for TV is, if Save the Cat were Dungeons and Dragons, Save the Cat writes for TV is Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, that is so geeky. Oh my word!
No, well,
wow.
if you only knew, there's probably
all right.
there's. By the way, there's like 20 more Dungeons and Dragons references in the book. So
okay.
So look forward to Dungeons and Dragons references in the book. But what I realized, because I've been teaching Save the Cat for a few years now. And a lot of my students were starting to come up and say, can I write a pilot instead of a feature? And I'd say yes. And they basically, the way they do it is they try to run the beats through these calculators you can find online. So you could type in like 60 and then it'll adjust, it'll crunch it down and things like that. And it really wasn't working. So I had to work with them a lot to figure it out. So anyway, I wrote this book. Here's my intention. I'm kind of getting off track, but here's my intention of the book. TV, you mentioned before you should look into TV. I'm in the WGA. They send this thing every year. The last time I looked at it, maybe it was a couple years ago, the number of TV jobs to feature jobs, it's really depressing. It's like, I wish I should have written it down, but I think it's like something like 7,500 out of 9,500 jobs are TV jobs. So there's a couple thousand feature jobs to all those TV jobs. So I kind of wrote this book for the inside pitch type person who would like to get into TV, who probably wants to get staffed on one of those writers' rooms or sell a pilot, but honestly, if you read the intro of my book, selling a pilot is really hard, and it usually is only done by insiders because they want showrunners. Sometimes they'll pair a new pilot writer with a showrunner.
But you know something, often that pilot writer is somebody who's still established.
Absolutely.
A lot of the pilot writers that I know that were, like I think of Ryan Condal, who wrote Colony, and now he's doing the spin-off to Game of Thrones.
Yep.
He hadn't been in TV, but he had written quite a few features that were produced. And in fact, he had sold a Great Big Spec Script, which kind of launched his career, and then eventually he segued. But they paired him with Carlton Cuse for the Colony show, and then eventually Ryan just ran it himself. But so that's a popular strategy that management companies and agencies will do, is that they will pair somebody. But if you're not paired and you don't have any experience in town, selling a pilot it's, I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's really difficult. So yes, it's far more believable to be writing your pilots to get staffed on an existing show rather than selling your pilot.
Yes. Yes. So
right.
I need
Sorry
Chris,
for that detour.
No, no, it's great. I mean, I need you to be there to be my spokesman, because that's basically the philosophy of the book. Is I'm coming at it from people that want to write pilots, mostly to get staffed, but I'm not pulling the rug out from you that you could be the miracle lottery ticket.
That's right.
Because you could be. And honestly, I think thinking you could, that denial, that fake optimism, I think those scripts are, because I think the people that are going to staff, they want to read something that I want to watch this show. I mean, that would excite them. So you need to write like that. You can't purely just write like give up on that dream. And I think that'll fuel your passion. So, but the focus of the book is really to come up with a pilot that you can write to get staffed and or sell. Here's the problem. To do that, you need a series. So I had to come up with a section that helped you crack your series before you could come up with the pilot itself. And when I say a series, I'm not saying you have to write your series. I mean, you have to come up with the concept of your series. You have to come up with the pitch of your series. You have to, I even take you through a process where you come up with a high-level season 1 just to help brainstorm your pilot episode to see what you might need to set up or characters you might need to bring into your pilots. So that's what the book's focus is on. The book will take you, if you pick up this book, you should be able to come in with no idea, or if you have an idea, great. You'll be able to come in with a no idea, go through the exercises, and by the end, you'll have a pilot beat sheet, a board. Okay, it doesn't take you through the actual typing and all that kind of stuff, but it has that outline sense, and a pitch for your show as well. That I use kind of a standard pitch template that I got years ago, and every agent I ever have had, or every time I ever gone out with a TV series pitch, they don't really do it anymore, I guess, because I've been around for long enough. But they were always like, "Hey, I have this great template. I'm going to send it to you." And it was always the same thing. It was always the
Was it the Warner Brothers one? Because there was like a Warner Brothers.
It was a riff on the Warner Brothers. I found the Warner Brothers ones later, but I had managers and agents saying, "We have this secret template, you know, and we're going to send it to you, and it'll solve all your problems." It was based off the Warner Brothers one. I can't remember. There was an agency one that was floating around too. That was just subtly different. That was really popular. But the Warner Brothers that's kind of the one I think it was all born from. So anyway, that's in the book. I have that. I have basically my version of it, which is the same as the one I got 10 years ago, which is the one somebody tried to send me two months ago. It's been the same for a while. So anyway, the book will take you through all of that. It'll take you through coming up with your series, figuring out what your pilot is, breaking your story on your pilot. So breaking means brainstorming, coming up, solving your story problems, piecing together the puzzle. That's what the book is for. So first step is good pilots need a good series. This is my series formula I came up with over time. And I should say, and I'm not sure if I have a slide for it, so I might just say it ahead of time. But my series formula is world plus character plus franchise type, and then less or so format and audience. That's just like, is it a 45-minute show? What network? Whatever it is. Is it 30-minute? Is it an hour? What network? I'm not going to talk. That's why I put it in parens. So world, character, and franchise type. And here's the thing. If you're writing a pilot to get staffed, it's a little different than if you were the showrunner of Mayor of Eastwood and you could just write for Kate Winslet and it's being viewed, in a different sense. Because when you're writing to get staffed, I have some other things that you should come up with. I can't remember. I'm just going to say what these are, and maybe the slide later will contradict me because I'm doing it off the top of my head. So number one, your pilot is a setup. It's a pitch for a show. Number two. Number three, it has to be a good story. And that's the thing you might find that you might not do. Let's say if you were the showrunner Mayor of Eastwood with Kate Winslet, your pilot might not be a story. And the reason I'm picking on that one, because I don't know if anybody saw the show on HBO. I'm not going to spoil it, but I'll kind of hint at a spoiler. The show is is all set up. The pilot is entirely set up with a little catalyst in the end. It doesn't really have a beginning, middle, end. It just gives setup of characters. What I suggest to you, if you're writing a pilot to get staffed, is you show off all your skills. You show off that you know a story with beginning, middle, end, twists. You grab their attention, you pull them in. I'm not sure that it's enough. It's very risky to go in and write a pilot that's just all set up and say, I know how to set up a character that really doesn't have those typical twists and turns of a story that would hook you and pull you in. So I propose that you have a harder job than what somebody else might have in that world. Anyway, that's one. And last but not least, there's probably a couple more I'm missing, but we'll see them on the slide. I think as someone who's writing a pilot to get staffed, somebody who's writing a pilot to get an agent, you have to write a pilot that's you on a plate. That's my big thing, is write something that shows, that's authentic to you, that shows themes that mean something. Tell them something about yourself in whatever pilot you create. And all of this basically, well, the other thing I'd like to say, series aren't necessarily stories, which is one of the things that when Chris gets pitched a TV show here, sometimes they're like, I'm having problems with your formula with my series. And even in a case like The Americans, season 1 of The Americans, you know, it's a Russian spies embedded in the US as a family. Season 1, they might have a mission. They might, somewhere along the line, or they might have several missions, or their missions might go back and forth. They don't necessarily, and that show they probably do actually, have a hero, goal, obstacle, stakes, but certainly a show that's episodic, like Rick and Morty, you know, doesn't have hero, goal, obstacle, and stakes. It's something different. Other serialized shows don't necessarily have hero, goal, obstacle, stakes. So when you're coming up with your series, there's some different stuff you have to think about. And this is where we get into the world, character, and franchise type. And I'll explain all of them just super briefly. So I think if you could flip to the next slide, I might have something about worlds. Let's see. Yeah. So my big thing is, I think most TV shows, unlike when I come up with film concepts, and I'm a big concept guy. I have all kinds of games I play with myself, to figure out how to come up with cool high concepts and things like that. But I think in TV, because it has to last so long, the high concept is sort of limiting. It's not bad to have a high concept, but I think the key, the shows I want to watch usually have a world I want to, dive into. And I think the key is figuring out what world you're passionate about, what you want to write about. I have all kinds of geeky worlds I'm passionate about. I was a street performing juggler at Renaissance festivals when I was in college and high school. So I know all about Renaissance festivals and D&D and stuff like that. I was a computer programmer. I made computer games for years. I know that world. There's all kinds of worlds I know. For whatever reason, I love WWE. Not necessarily the matches, but I love the behind the scenes story, the dark side of wrestling. And there's all these kind of worlds I love, and I love to research. There's other ones I've lived in, again, I've lived in the programming world. I've lived in the street performing world. My son has autism, so I know what it's like to be a father of a son with autism. These are all worlds that I've lived in. And what I suggest, if you don't have an idea for your TV show yet, is brainstorm a big old list of every world you've been in, every world you've lived. And I have some lists down the side there to help you. So 9 to 5s, what jobs have you had? What responsibilities have you had? Growing pains, what are some, touchstones of growing up or just growing old or whatever that you've lived through. Certain lifestyles, if you live in a certain kind of lifestyle or arena. And really that's what these worlds are. They're story arenas. They're not locations. There's blasts from the past we've seen lately, everything from the Goldbergs, even Stranger Things, certainly kind of this nostalgia you can get into. If you're really into that, things about very specific locations. Maybe you lived in a really unique place, or maybe you've lived in a mundane place, but you just kind of know the ins and outs of it. And then last but not least, there's just pure make-believe. If you just have a thing, if you're like the expert on vampires or something, and that's just what you love, and you've read every vampire book in the world, maybe that's your world. So my big thing when you're starting to find concepts is write out all those worlds. And the reason I want you to do that is because that's where you're going to find that authentic you on a plate kind of thing. Like if you can bring your experience or even just your passion, maybe you just love something. Maybe it's what you love to research. That's where your authenticity and your passion will come through. And that's what I want.
That's where part of the voice is. Also.
That's where the voice is.
Yeah.
That's how you find the voice. And then once you find the world, I didn't put this in the slides, but in the book, I think you find themes, like say, what are the themes in that world that speak to me? And you can find themes at a very early level. And you can also find characters. You can say, who are the characters in this world? Who are the characters that speak to this theme that means something to me? And you can do a really deep dive into this world, character, and theme from early on. So I find worlds really important in television. I spoke to a lot of my friends that are in television that work in writers' rooms. And, my one friend said to me, I said, what do you think is the most important thing in selling a pilot? And he said, I think you have to come with a world. You have to come, everybody says character, everybody says, he said, they're really looking for these unique worlds. And he said, there are some shows that sell that don't have worlds really. They have point of views or something. But he said, they're almost always by some person that wrote a best-selling book or a stand-up comic, the Seinfeld of it all. He said, for people like us, if we don't have that thing, we really have to bring a world. And even those are debatable. I mean, Seinfeld, in some ways, has a world. He's got a point of view. It's kind of like middle-aged, unmarried New Yorkers, neurotic New Yorkers. I mean, that is a world that he knows maybe better than I know. So think of the world. If you take nothing else today, if you're brainstorming this stuff, really go to town, make a list, start exploring it. In the book, there's some exercises to help you as well. So that's worlds. If you flip the slide.
All right, and let me just say to our members that Ramesh is gathering your questions. And so when...
Oh, I am? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, it was just sort of a hint, Ramesh. And so when Jamie goes through his slides and of course, if at any time Jamie wants to take a question, he can always ask. But we will ask your questions of Jamie.
I'll move through this relatively quickly. You can get the book if you want, but it'll give you enough to get some inspiration, and then I'll take your questions. So the other piece of the puzzle, if you remember the equation, I say world plus character. And by the way, I have a big expanded chapter on character because Save the Cat doesn't have, believe it or not, Save the Cat really doesn't have a lot on character, only how it services the plot. I felt television needed some character stuff because when I pitch television, like every time I pitch television or every time I've gotten advice from the studios I pitch television to, they always come back and say it's all about character with us. They always say that is the most important thing. So while I'm saying world is the most important thing, and I think it's a good starting point, I think character and world go hand in hand. So I didn't put anything in this slide, particularly about character, because it's a really deep dive I do in the book. And a lot of it's based on theme, because I have this idea that you have to have a character who has this flaw that sort of extends through a whole series. That flaw, those decisions they make, you need to set that up in the pilot. That's one of the most important things you set up in the pilot. I call it a broken compass. It's just a weird point of view that they make decisions based on this, internal psychology that you need to set up in the pilot because every episode is going to play into that particular worldview. So you'll have to get the book for that. That'll be the thing. Go buy it. Go buy it. You can buy the book. So franchise types are the other part of the equation. Here's the reason I call them franchise types was when I first started to pitch television. This goes back a ways. Everybody would say, what's the franchise? And I hated this word, by the way, but I used it. I ended up using it because to me, a franchise is like LeBron James or I don't know, something like that, McDonald's. But what they meant by the franchise was what's the story engine in your idea that every week kind of can generate new episodes. Like every week it brings conflict. It brings hero, goal, obstacle, stakes. If we want to go back to the inside pitch version of this, which I, subscribe to, these franchise types generate those. Like it's inherent from you pitching your idea. Like you can almost go and make a list of a bunch of hero, goals, and obstacles and stakes. Okay. So just to give an example, and you could probably come up with these yourself. If I said, what's the recurring story engine of some of the shows you watch? And if you went back to like the shows I watched when I was a kid, they were all episodic. So those are like blank of the weeks, I call them. So blank of the week, and you know what these shows are. The X-Files would be a blank of the week. House would be a blank of the week. There's shows that every week have a new blank that the hero has to solve. So they're usually like, the hero has a job. Every week they have to solve this blank. It gets solved by the end of the week. Next week there's a new blank. So that's
Isn't that like a police procedurals? Yeah.
Procedurals. Even to an extent, something like, we don't see these as much anymore. But if you look at like The Mandalorian, I don't know if you watch The Mandalorian, it's kind of a blank of the week with some serialization running through it. But every week he gets a new mission, a new something to save. There's always something.
Right.
So,
but there is a through line connecting it all, right? Which is
absolutely.
Baby Yoda.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think you can get away with pure blank. I mean, I don't know, maybe like the Hawaii Five-O's of the world kind of do it, but then there's like a serial killer that runs through until the end of the season that they're hunting or something. There'll be some kind of serialization. So even a procedural has some serialization. So I would also say with these franchise types, they do mix and mingle a little bit. It just depends on which one you put first. So the more serialized ones, the other one that would be more procedural, a lot of the Trapped Togethers, they're the family shows, they're the office shows. What We Do in the Shadows are kind of Trapped Togethers. And they're ones where kind of the people that are trapped together are causing conflict with each other. And that's where the conflict comes every week. It's the situation comedies. The trap is a situation, and they're kind of trapped together. But then we have these other ones that are closer to the serialized ones. And a lot of these are kind of based on the Blake Snyder genres. If you look at the Blake Snyder genres, they're very similar in some cases to these. There's a dude with a season-long problem, and that would be somebody that gets thrown into a situation that they didn't ask for, that they have to handle. And that could be anything from like Stranger Things to maybe Walking Dead could be in that scenario.
Have you watched Resident Alien?
I have.
That's a really good show, and that's it.
Yeah, for sure. No, I love that show. That's a great one. So dude with a season-long problem, woman or man with a plan. That's one where instead of like the villain bringing the problem, the hero has a plan and they bring the action. So it could be anything from like, I'm trying to think of what my woman with, like Revenge, the show Revenge might be that way. There's anything that's like Mighty Ducks or something like that, where they're on a mission. They have some kind of mission to go to. So this is one where the main character has a mission. They have a plan. They have a goal that they're trying to seek across a season or a series. And that's usually woman with a plan. And again, you see some like dude with a season-long problem and woman with a plan. Like Breaking Bad, it kind of starts as like a man with a plan, but then maybe he becomes a dude with a problem because he gets in a bigger mess. So there is mixture, but if you have two, it's okay. The problem is some people don't have any. So that's kind of what this is helping you with. Buddy love might be something. It could be anything from a buddy cop kind of scenario to a love story. You don't see a lot of these in TV, but Bridgerton would be an example. Catastrophe might be something. There are definitely more now. A show I love called Love on Netflix that nobody seems to ever watch.
It's a really good show, actually.
That's like one of my favorites on Netflix. And anyway, there's a bunch of them here you can check out. I'm No Fool might be like, it's basically somebody that's looked at as their value isn't looked at as strongly as you'd think. They're looked at as a fool, but they're undervalued. They're sort of an underdog. So maybe something like New Girl or something like that. Like it's some character that they're looked at as this kind of unusual thing, but actually they have smarts in some ways, or they have some kind of talents that are undervalued and actually better than some of the people they're around. Why Done It is your mystery shows. And then last but not least, I put this last category I came up with called Mad Mad World. And those are like The Wire or Game of Thrones, which I think are more about the world. They're about these big world things. And then all of these kind of pop into that world, that it's like this bigger world. Like The Wire might have a Why Done It, but then it has other characters that might be involved in Dude with the Season-Long Problem and things like that. And those are more world-focused. They're the bigger shows. And honestly, I think they're the riskier ones to write as a pilot for you, for me and you. I think it's harder to write the Game of Thrones story or The Wire or something like that. These big, expansive shows. A lot of times they're categorized by characters who never meet each other. They don't know each other are. Sometimes the stories don't even connect. And again, they're all about the world building. But they're not all world building shows. Like some world building shows, like Carnival Row or something like that, they have more, I think, straight arrow plots to them than maybe Game of Thrones has or something like that. There's no problem. I love Game of Thrones. The Wire is one of my favorite shows ever. They're just really difficult to write a pilot for as a person trying to get staffed, because it's not like one hero. It's all over the place. You're setting all this stuff up, or even a small group of heroes. So anyway, that's my opinion on this.
Jamie, sometimes I hear a pitch and it's a pitch for a feature, and I think, this sounds like it might be a better series. And then sometimes I hear a pitch for a pilot and I think, this might be a better feature. How does a writer know if his idea is a feature or a pilot?
That's a great question. Because I've converted my own features to pilots and so on and so forth. I think the most dangerous thing is when you take this is what I wouldn't do. If you had a feature, I would not just say, I'm going to turn this into a show and I'm just going to blow up the setup to like 3 episodes. You know what I'm saying? Like that's like the worst thing to do.
You know, I will read pilots, especially when this whole TV thing started to take off a few years ago. I could swear that I was reading pilots that were the first 60 pages of a screenplay.
Yeah.
And I feel almost 100% that's the way they read. I'm
guilty of that. I'm guilty of that. Yeah.
And then you know, maybe they just altered the ending a little bit. Maybe but literally they like took the first 60 pages, you know, out of a PDF, and I was like, oh yeah, I don't know, man. Like this just isn't working. Are there specific elements that are found in TV series that are not found in features?
Yeah, I think it's that whole thing. It's strange because it has changed, right? We do have, like in the past, I would just say, if it has like a beginning, middle, end, and that's it, you know, and that's all you're really thinking about, then it's probably best for a movie. It's probably shorter. Because I honestly think that you could take most movies these days. Like I think you could take the first Star Wars movie and turn it into a relatively interesting television show. You know, you could have Luke hanging out with his friends while Princess Leia is flying in the ship, and that could be your first episode. And then you could. So while I definitely think there is, I think more now. I almost don't want to say that that's true, because I see things that easily could go either way these days. And I have a hard time saying that either couldn't be there. My gut would say television usually has larger casts that you want to spend time with each cast member. It usually has larger worlds so that you want to explore the nooks and crannies. And again, when I say worlds, I'm meaning arenas. If you can expand that into something. So the TV shows are usually more, you know, characters that you just need to spend more time in to get at the themes. Features tend to have almost more plot driven. They just have those beats that you can hit out in those kind of save the cat kind of models. But I honestly, the reason I'm struggling with it is I struggle with that myself. So I've had like
and it is evolving, you know.
It's evolving.
It's evolving. Like I read 2 episodes of a series yesterday, the pilot and episode 2, for a 6-episode series.
Yeah.
So it's merely 6 episodes.
I've written a 4-episode series. I mean,
so like, you know, in some ways that's like writing a feature and a sequel.
It is.
Yeah. So the line is blurred and it's moving. It's moving a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I recently had 2 biopics that I was working on, and they were similar, and they were kind of these types of biopics. And one, I just knew that it was a television show, and the other, I knew it was a feature, and I can't really say why. And sort of everybody around me agreed on both of them. We just kind of knew it looking at it, and it's a very thin slicing kind of reason. I can't even say why. I mean, in one case, there was one of these that it spanned multiple years. It almost had multiple stories within stories. You know, it wasn't like just a straight arrow hero with a goal and then the end. It was like, well, hero had a goal, but it was a big goal, and then there were lots of sub goals in the way that you could almost map out as seasons. And that's the reason that one became a TV series, as opposed to the other one, where it really was more straight. It still took place over many years, but it was more straight arrow and direct. But I think it's a tricky question, and I think you hit the nail on the head by saying it's because the landscape's evolving, because TV is definitely evolving in that landscape. Next slide, I guess. Okay, so this is the thing we already kind of went over. And I think I hit all of them. Maybe the only thing was a series is a launch pad. It is kind of a cliffhanger. Your pilot should, and this really should be your pilot. I put series there, but your pilot is a launch pad to the series, and which means when you get to that end of the pilot, the reader should almost be able to picture and want to watch next week's episode. And it's obvious. I mean, that's
the biggest issue I have with the pilots I read, is that you get to the end of it and you ask, how is this a series?
Right. Yep. I think that's the key. It sets up, because it really is a pitch for that series. So it has to be a launch pad. And I think the rest of them I hit. So next slide. Okay, so just to bring us full circle, I wanted to go back. So then, of course, the book does hit the Save the Cat 15 beats. And turn my phone off before Blake Snyder calls. So the
that would be a long distance call.
that would probably be a feature. A feature
or an episode from the Twilight Zone.
Or an episode that could be an anthology. So the Save the Cat beats, the 15 beats. So here was what I'm getting back to what I mentioned. A lot of people using Save the Cat to write their pilots over the years have gone to there's these online calculators. You crunch them up. It says, okay, since you're doing a 40-minute show or a 60-minute show or whatever, your catalyst now needs to be on page 5 or page 4 or page 3. But if you watch a lot of pilots, and I watch a ton, like I always say that I think this book is more me just justifying how much television I watch, because I watch so much. What you realize with pilots is pilots spend a lot of time going from beat 1 to 6. They do not do what those calculators would tell you 1 to 6 probably has to happen in 8 pages or 7 pages or something like that. But what you find is, and there's a good reason for it. It's because the character part, right? It's the world building, the theme. So most television shows will give you, when they're doing a pilot story, they will give you a long first act. They'll give you a very long first act. Usually, they might even take 20 minutes into the first act. There's practical, like when I talk to my friends that are staffed, and I brought this up, they said there's practical reason for it. They're like, they want to take their time in the beginning. First of all, in features, we're used to spending 20 minutes in the setup. It's just a very natural progression. You can speed it up a little bit, but we're used to spending like 20 minutes to set up. But they also said that it's the easiest time to switch the channel is that first commercial break. So you really have to make that first commercial break work. There's a whole idea that if you can get under their skin with the characters and the setup and those kind of issues, then you can, then people will keep watching. So taking a long time in the setup is really important. So what I did in those Save the Cat beats is I basically said, I took away all of those numbers. So you see there's no numbers there anymore. There's no 12, there's no 30, there's no 25. And I did this after watching a ton of pilots and breaking them down into these beats. And what I realized was 99% of the shows hit all of these beats, okay, with one exception I'll get to in a second. However, they pick and choose where they spend their time. That's the big thing. So they might spend 20 minutes on a setup, you know, going 1 to 6. They might then only spend 10 minutes in the fun and game section, which in a feature would be a big, you know, proportional part. They might hit the midpoint. They might rush the end. They might they might do one scene that goes through bad guys close in and all is lost. They hit all the beats, but they pick and choose where they spend their time. So I look at these beats for television more like an itinerary and less like a schedule, like a time schedule. So it's more like a checklist of the ones you want to hit, and that instead of being that whole, I have to hit this one by 12. And the one big revelation I discovered with television pilots, when you get to 13, 14, and 15, many shows, not all, there are some shows that have complete beginning, middle, ends. And by the way, there are also shows that hit these beats right on time, especially like 30-minute sitcoms, Rick and Morty episodes, things like that. They're very structured as far as times and stuff like that goes. They work all the beats. But the one exception I found, and this was a big revelation for me, was beat number 13, break into 3. So typically, remember, we talked about this earlier, there's an all is lost moment. The worst thing that could happen, the plan isn't going to happen. There's a wallowing, there's a dark night of the soul. Then there's a break into 3 where the hero gets a new idea and they decide, oh, I'm going to win the day. What I discovered in a lot of pilots is that beat is often the end of the episode. It ends there. It doesn't have a finale, so to speak. It's like the bad guys close in, the big decision to then go do something. And a couple of the ones in the book I have like this are Ozark, if you watch Ozark. There's Grey's Anatomy, the pilot of Grey's Anatomy. There's a dark night of the soul. They make a big decision. And then next week, that's where it'll begin. The goal will be going in. So it's a break into the series, not a break into the finale. And it's kind of like a hero making a decision to then do something. So certain shows have finales. A lot of those ones that do have a break into series, they kind of do a montage, or they might drop a B story beat in that finale section. But you know, there are a lot of shows that just skip that finale and save it for next week. I watched Cobra Kai recently, the pilot. There's the kind of in the end, he, you know, spoiler for the pilot, he's like, you know, I'm gonna bring back Cobra Kai, and he's tying the thing up, and that's the end. It's the break into. In a movie, he'd do that, and then there'll be a fight or something, and the champion, and they win, and then it'll be the end. But in this, it actually is the launch pad into the series. So it was one of the bigger revelations I had going through this when I checked it out. And I think that's all my slides. I'm not sure. There might be other, like, yeah, this kind of stuff, other stuff. This is just the stuff I mentioned. In the book, there's the pitch template. There's character stuff. I went through all this stuff. And then there's beat sheets of pilots for Barry, Ozark, Grey's Anatomy, Stranger Things, Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. These are all my favorite shows. What We Do in the Shadows, Blackish, The Mandalorian, This Is Us, and a bunch more. So there's full-on beat sheets with kind of commentary as it goes. So next slide. And that's it. And if you want to know more, and I'm hanging around, I'm not going anywhere, but my Twitter is @Jamie_Nash. And the Save the Cat Twitter is @SaveTheCat. And you can also go to Save the Cat. They have a website, SaveTheCat.com, or you can just go buy the book on Amazon. It's up there, or wherever you buy books. If you don't want to give Bezos your money, you can go other places.
All right, so Ramesh, I know that we must have members that are chomping at the bit to ask some questions, and so this is your show now.
Okay. Scylla has two questions. One, does Save the Cat structure lend itself to tandem and/or fracture narrative? And two, are you at a disadvantage in selling your pilot if you have main characters and big cast?
And what you broke up? What kind of cast?
Big, huge.
Big cast. Okay.
Big cast.
Yeah. I think big casts are sort of okay, but I would be cautious. I'd be very cautious because I think it's harder to tell that story. In the book, I break down This Is Us, which has, it's not a big cast, but This Is Us has 4 or 5 equal players if you base the timeline. And they actually, each story hits every beat, like, you know, in that pilot. And it's amazing. It's amazing how it's done, the balance of that pilot. That pilot's really, really a cool pilot. Stranger Things also has a cool cast. And I think the pilot's pretty good. I think if you wrote that yourself, it would probably make some noise. So I just be cautious. Like once you get to The Wire or something where there's just like multiple storylines and it's all going in all different directions. Because my key point is with a pilot, I think you should write, if you want to get staffed, I think you should write a story. Your pilot should have a story. Don't just write a setup. That's my big pitch to you if you're writing a pilot. Write a pilot that has a beginning, middle, end. It has twists. It has turns. It has all its loss. Don't just write one that introduces character after character after character and then ends, which I see.
So is this the difference between the premise pilot and the non-premise pilot?
No, that's a little different. And I talk about that in the book too. So the premise pilot and the non-premise pilot. The premise pilot is the origin story pilot. So you can, I'm not saying, I'm using setup kind of specifically here. I think all pilots have to set up characters. I just think you should set them up while telling a story. Certain pilots I've read set up characters without telling a story. They're saving the story to later. And that's what I'm saying. Definitely tell a story when you do it. The non-premise pilot is episode 3, essentially. You're writing episode 3. You're writing an episode that somebody could drop into at any time and watch it. And it would feel like, it feels like the 3rd or 4th or 7th episode. It just feels like another episode. Here's the thing about non-premise pilots. It's sort of a trick. Like if you watch Blackish, like the first episode of Blackish, that episode sets up all the characters. It kind of feels like an origin story, even if it's not. There's a change in the air. There's like a character arc in the air. So it does things that episode 3 really doesn't do, but it feels like episode 3. I think that's the key word. It feels like episode 3. But yeah, in this case, that's all I mean by setup. I'm not sure that I understood tandem and fractured. Do you have an idea?
I think she means, I'm guessing, I guess she means, I'm guessing tandem narrative is parallel stories.
Okay.
And fracture narrative, I'm guessing, is non-linear.
Right. And what was the question? What was the context of the question?
Does Save the Cat structure lend itself to tandem and/or fracture narratives?
I personally think so. It's funny. One of the things Blake gets derided for as well is in Save the Cat, I think he said something like Memento isn't a good movie or something. And I personally think Memento this is a feature idea, but I think it fits the structure of the Save the Cat. I think it has all his lost moments and midpoint twists. Just, you know, just because it's the way it's told is this cool, innovative idea. I think it still does good storytelling. You know, I think it still works. But anyway, so I do This Is Us in there, and This Is Us it's flashbacky, it's tandem, it's all that stuff. It tells This Is Us would be for that person, This Is Us would be the perfect thing to look at because it tells 4 storylines. One's a flashback, you know, and then they all come together in the end. They all have a beginning, middle, end, and they all tie together in a cathartic bow by the end. But you also know what you're going to watch next week. It's a great pilot if you're doing that kind of thing. And I think I have a couple more. Stranger Things, believe it or not, it doesn't have flashback, but it tells a bunch of tandem stories. There's the 11 story. There's the cop and the mom story. There's the kids looking for their friend. there's multiple storylines going in those first few episodes that eventually come together through later seasons. So I think that would be another one. So my point is, yes, you can use this for Tandem and Fractured.
Okay.
You know, I think from a practical standpoint, and maybe I'm just being self-serving here because, you know, I look for projects for actors, but it might be easier to sort of capture the attention of people if the show is built around a role. Because
I agree.
With something like This Is Us, somebody reads that and they're like, well, you know, there's not really a starring role in it. And if you look at the cast, there's no big stars in that. I mean, you know, with all due respect to anybody who's in it. And some people might have a different definition of what a star is. But I just read a pilot for Dustin Hoffman recently, and you know, like that is built around him. He's not a client; he's actually attached to it, and I read it for a different reason. But you know, and so you could see that pilot going out to any number of actors who would read it and go, "Oh yeah, I want to play this part," and as opposed to something like This Is Us, where, and I've not actually seen the show, so I'm talking out of my ass as usual, but it is an ensemble piece, more so, I believe, and so much more difficult time to get a star in it, which is why there isn't a star in it. And it's the same thing sort of with Stranger Things. There's no real star in it. I mean, Winona Ryder's certainly a respected name, but you know, she's not Kate Winslet, let's say, who is now in a show, and this show, I'm assuming, is kind of like her show. Yeah,
absolutely.
So yeah, so I think it's probably wiser to build a show around one character than to write for a large ensemble. But since your pilot's not going to sell anyway, right?
Yeah.
Do whatever you want to do. But it's just some practical advice.
It's much like the Page 12 catalyst. You know, do it. Like, it'd be very easy for me to say, you should write for a star, because I think that's the right answer. I mean, given all the other odds against you, write for a star. But then you could also look at it from the other end. Given all the odds against you, just do something. Who knows? You'll be the unicorn. But you know, I totally agree. If you can narrow down, it's also much easier to write like Breaking Bad, I think, than it is to put all the things I'm telling you to put in your pilot in This Is Us, because This Is Us is scattered, or Stranger Things or something. Breaking Bad, it follows one person pretty much in that pilot, and you can just stick with that. I think the level of difficulty is probably in your advantage, but you're also right. I rate features, and it's the same game. I tend to try to write for a star. Like, that's usually almost every spec I write. I'm like, well, what's going to happen is this is going to go to a producer, and then they're going to either try to attach a director or an actor. And usually it's an actor 9 times out of 10. So that's my whole life is spent trying to attach actors to projects. So maybe you could stem yourself off trouble by writing an ensemble. Then you won't be in my world. They'll just say no. So no, but I agree.
Dennis wants to know, he says he has the Save the Cat software, especially the board, and he wants to know what the benefits the software has.
I don't have the software. I think I might have tried it many years ago. It's not my thing. I think, but I know generally what it is because I love toys, and I think I've played with it. The software hasn't been updated for TV, by the way, so I should say that. So it's basically the old thing. But the software, that 10-20-10 thing, that's where it really is key. It's formulated so that you can do that bulletin board, index card kind of thing. But then it also has some other features, which that's the part I really don't know about. But for the most part, people get it to do the index cards.
Oh, okay. This is sort of actually two people kind of related. One, Denise wants to know about sort of British TV and versus US when it comes to pacing. And then someone, Dolores, has asked any thoughts on 90-minute shows like Sherlock, or like Luther, I think, has 90-minute episodes. A lot of British shows actually do that. It's like 4 episodes a season and each episode is 90 minutes long. A lot of European shows do that. So just sort of talk about pacing between European shows and British shows and US shows and that.
It's funny because I think the British innovated, like a lot of what they were doing is what we eventually did. I remember watching some of those shows and being like, well, that's so weird. They only have 4 episodes that are like an hour and a half long. Or there'd be something like The Office, which was, I can't remember how many episodes, maybe 10 and done. And it just felt, you know, very unique, right, and something we'd eventually get to. And I think we followed them to an extent, like we've become that. Maybe we don't do the hour and a half episode as much, but I'm sure there's something out there. It's probably like, I mean, Game of Thrones to an extent, they move back and forth between their time frames. I don't really have any opinions on it other to say I wouldn't do it for your pilot. I wouldn't write an hour and a half pilot. I would stick to the tried and true right now. Things might change, but that's one thing I wouldn't necessarily get creative with. I'd either write a half an hour pilot or an hour long. I wouldn't try to write the 2-hour pilot or something, or 10. I mean, there are certain animation circles where you can write 10-minute pilots because there are 10-minute animation shows. That's one of the things, worlds I live in. And it's funny, I still write the 22-minute pilot for those. I don't write, like, even though you could probably get away with doing 12 minutes or something for the pilot, I still write the 22 and say, well, they'll get the idea. And then it opens my market up a little bit.
Pauline wants to know, she said, how would you recommend having someone get their pilot scene to potentially get staffed? I wrote one and also filmed a sample pilot along with the series Bible.
Yeah, I don't have any great advice for that, just like nobody has any great advice for that. It's kind of the whole, how do you get an agent? How do you do? I think for those things, like when I came up, the way I got an agent was I made a lot of relationships with producers. I got things in motion. I got movies produced. And then I ultimately said to those people that were working on things, I said, hey, can you help me get a manager? Can you help me get an agent? And that's every single manager and agent I ever got was through finding a producer first and then kind of getting an agent, or making a movie first and then getting an agent. But I wrote a whole blog about this, and I'm sure Chris could talk about this too. There's no great answer to this. It's try everything. Don't spend a lot of money. I wish I had a better answer. And I always say managers seem more open to your stuff than agents. Like cold, I don't think agents even want your stuff, to be honest. Maybe there's a couple out there, but it seems to me, unless you're like some kind of super genius and really just blew them away, I don't really get the feel that there's a big market for agents for brand new writers trying to get in. Maybe more for television, but managers tend to read stuff a little more. They're a little more open to it.
Julie wants to know, can you say something about the difference in narrative description between screenwriting and pilot writing? It seems that pilot writing leans a bit more on the characters and what they say and do and choose, and a bit less on using narrative to set up the mood and narrate the world of each scene.
I don't know that I totally buy that, but I do believe that there's more of an emphasis on character. There's certain budgetary limitations. There's those kind of things you sort of have to think of. But I think the world of, I know when I write pilots, I don't really think too much different about the form of it. I do think differently about all the things we just talked about, like the actual story, what the story is I'm biting off for that episode, the fact that it needs to continue, the fact that it needs to promise a bigger world, the fact that it needs to be a pitch, the fact that characters need to be set up for the long term as opposed to the short term. But if you're talking in regards to form, with the exception of like sitcom format or something, I tend to write mostly the same. I will say that as a feature writer first, that somebody that came to features and then went to TV, the feature writers of the world, we tend to be more Scott Rosenberg and Shane Blackish, and TV might be a little bit more stripped down. But even that, it just depends on what script you're reading and who you're reading.
Okay. what are some of the, this is Maria, what are some of the key differences that a writer should keep in mind when creating a pilot for serialized show versus a procedural show?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the key differences are what I think they're very similar pilot-wise, believe it or not. I think because pilots, you are just doing the promise of what happens first. You still have to set up the characters. You still have to set up the world. So they end up being surprisingly similar, like even when you do the procedural and the serialized. But of course, if you're doing a procedural, your pilot should have a conclusion. It should have a beginning, middle, end. And then if you're doing a serialized streamer, instead, it should be that break into the next episode or something that is just a continuation to the next episode.
Katie has a question. She says, do writers need a pitch deck of some sort to go with their pilot? Not a Bible, but a document with a character sheet, the world, a series synopsis, etc.
I recommend it. That's the template we talked about in the book. Warner Brothers originally had this template that you could fill out. And in the book, I give you like the basic, and it sounds like you already know what it is. It's kind of a Bible light. To be honest, you don't have to have it, because if you're getting staffed, they won't ask for that. The only time they might ask for that is if it is a manager or something, they want to see the bigger picture, or if they like your pilot so much, they want to see what more you have. It's strange though. I'm rarely asked for a paper pitch. Usually what'll happen is I'll be called to give a pitch, and I'll use that paper pitch as the basis for my paper pitch. Like all my bases will be covered in that piece of paper, but usually it's a verbal pitch. Usually it's in the room. This year it's been over Zoom, but you'll rarely have to hand it in. Maybe sometimes every now and then somebody will say, you know, can I see that too?
Well, Sarit has a question here. Why do you think we are witnessing now the death of the 22 episode season?
Yeah, that's a good question. I almost wonder if that's, and Chris, I don't know if you have any opinions on this. Well, for one thing, I think it's easier to tell a story in 10 minutes or 10 episodes or less. I actually felt a lot of the 22, sometimes I even feel the 10 or the 12 are stretched. They have padded episodes, you know, just to stretch it out to get to that required number. So part of the reason I think is that. I don't know if there's also like a contractual sort of reason too. Like they only have to pay writers a certain amount. They don't have to keep them. And I know some of that stuff was battled about in the last negotiation. And maybe with actors and stuff that plays a part too. I don't know if there's a business side to that 10 episode thing, but from my perspective, I just think it's most shows to get to 22, to tell a story, to get to that big ending, it was a stretch.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons I love European shows, actually, because it's usually like 8 to 10 episodes each season, and you're done and dusted with it. And it's, you know, and even there, sometimes you're right, with the 10 episodes, I'm like, yeah, you could have done without episode 9. Yeah. So
I'm seeing more and more that are just 6 episodes and things like that. I know I watch a lot of documentary. I know it's a different animal, but it felt like some of those HBO series, they were stretching their documentaries to be like 8 or 9 or 10, where Netflix really does a good job with 4. It's like 4 episodes, boom, you're done, you know?
You know, I think with, you mentioned actors, that if they want to get an A-lister, a lot of A-list actors do not want to sign on for 22 episodes. They want to be able to get in and out. And that has been the allure. So something like True Detective, that was a big allure for somebody like Matthew McConaughey, and where the stars can come in, make, you know, maybe 4 to 10 episodes, and they're out. Also, a lot of these shows are really big and really expensive. Yeah. You know, the one episode is costing more than a lot of features cost. And to have to do 22 of those, it's crazy. So, and then I don't know, maybe just because of the whole streaming element, maybe it's just different because shows are dropping all at once. And I don't know, you know, maybe that whole sort of algorithm just works better with fewer episodes than it does with more episodes.
Yeah, yeah. I guess because back in the network days with sweeps and stuff like that, and they had to do all this coverage. They probably got a juggernaut show like Friends or something, and it was like that's how they made their money. You know, make more of those. It's kind of the YouTube model where you get a lot of subscribers, so you just start making more episodes, and you know you could.
Do they still have sweeps?
They do. They do have sweeps. Yeah.
Sure. What about web series, Jamie? I saw that somebody had a question. Were you going to write a book about Save the Cat and web series? And so would this also apply for a very short episode of a web series?
Absolutely. You know, there's different ways to approach web series. I've actually done a couple web series in my time. There's different ways to approach them. Like if you're a really short web series, sometimes you can almost do it like this is the way I remember I approached a web series once. This isn't specifically said in the book, but I think the book would be great for a web series. I approached like one season that was 25 minutes. I kind of approached it as like one pilot television episode, and then it was kind of chunked accordingly. But that was a show that was chunked into like 3 to 5 minute chunks. But I think anything serialized, the book will work for. I actually think it would work well for comic books as well, in a weird sort of way. I think you could look at it for a comic book series if you were writing one of those.
David wants to know, he goes, given the changing scope for television, how important is a plan like Babylon 5 for finite seasons, and how does the structure apply season-wide / planned finite series-wide?
Yeah.
I've not seen Babylon 5, so.
Yeah, you could apply it to Lost or a show like any of those kind of shows that are like, do we need to stretch? Walking Dead was a good example. It's like, it felt like they had to endlessly go on. So like, it didn't feel like it narrowed in focus, like it was getting towards an end. By the way, this kind of thing, like the book certainly isn't a like writer's room survival guide, or it doesn't try to tell Aaron Sorkin how he should run his show or anything like that. So this is purely opinion. But I agree with you. I think it's critical. I think when you get into those mid-seasons of Walking Dead or The Lost or some of those shows, they absolutely need an end date. Otherwise, it just seems there's something in the middle where you just feel like nothing's important. You know, it just doesn't feel important in the middle. But that's just my opinion. That's, as a television watcher, that's my opinion.
Richard, I don't know if it's not a question, it's more of a statement. He says, I think fun and games might actually happen in Act 3 and not Act 2 in a 4-act structure.
It probably is a semantic argument. There's certain, and this is one of the things with Blake Snyder when he said it's trailer moments and things like that. That's why I view it more, it's what he termed it was the promise of the premise. And for me, the promise of the premise means it goes back to that log line thing. It's a hero, goal, obstacle, stakes. So what's the promise of a log line? It's the hero pursuing a goal against an obstacle with stakes. To me, that happens in the fun and games. That's the beginning of Act 2. In the finale, now if you view it the way Blake kind of hinted in his book, he did both. He kind of took both ways. He said oftentimes trailer moments are in there. And he was thinking about movies like I said, Liar, Liar, and Bruce Almighty, where, you know, Bruce would get the magic powers and the godlike powers, and he'd start doing funny stuff on the street. And a lot of that stuff would come into the trailer. In a movie like that, I could see where that's the trailer moments. If you're thinking about trailer moments, though, some movies have trailer moments in the beginning, some movies have trailer moments in the finale. But I would view fun and games. This is me. This is my interpretation of Save the Cat, and I wrote the book, so this is my version. Promise of the premise is a hero pursuing a goal against an obstacle. Think of it that way. And that always should happen in Act 2, not necessarily in Act 4 or Act whatever, which is the finale. In fact, I found that in Act 4 or Act 3, the finale, sometimes the goals change. Sometimes it's not the log line's goal is in the finale. Star Wars would be a good example just off the top of my head. So the goal is to get the plans to the rebels. So by the time we get to Act 3, they've already gotten the plans to the rebels. So now the plan is to destroy the Death Star. It's a different goal, but it's not your log line's goal. The log line goal wasn't destroy the Death Star. It was take the plans to Alderaan or the rebels or whatever you want. So anyway, it's a bit semantic, but so maybe you're viewing the fun and games as trailer moments, as fun and games. And by the way, fun and games doesn't necessarily mean fun or games for the hero. In a horror movie, fun and games might be getting attacked by Freddy Krueger for 20 minutes or something like that. So just keep all that in mind.
You know, you talk about the goal, and I think it's important that we understand that in the example like Star Wars, the goal doesn't change. It evolves, right? Yeah. Because it's really a cause and effect.
Yeah. Right?
The fact that they're going to destroy the Death Star is arises from the fact of the plans. It's like in Air Force One. You know, he needs to save his wife and daughter, and that's the goal. However, that's accomplished at the end of the second act. And then the entire third act is about him trying to apprehend the bad guy, who's either Gary Sinise or Gary Oldman.
Gary Oldman.
Thank you. And yes. But it is an evolution. It is a natural evolution. It's not some complete detour, for instance, where he saves his daughter at the end of the second act, and in the third act, he needs to find an In-N-Out, you know, to quench his hamburger craving. Right.
That's good.
Well, I see a lot of scripts like that. Okay.
With the
okay, Ramesh.
So, speaking of log lines, Katie asks, should a writer give the pilot log line or the series log line, or both, actually?
Yeah, and this is an excellent question that there's no 100% right or wrong answer to. I'm tempted to say I kind of like to give both. There's no rules in this stuff. Like when people ask you for what the log line is, there's not, unless somebody states there's rules about it, there's no real rules about it. There are situations where you'd give the series log lines. There are situations where you'd give the pilot log lines. And honestly, it kind of depends on what people ask for. If somebody didn't ask me, if I was just sending something, I might send them both. But it's really a coin toss. I'd almost have to see your log lines to know. I'd say write both of them and then pick the one that you think is the most compelling. Because sometimes your pilot log line is enough to pitch the series. And sometimes your pilot log line is so narrow that people won't understand what your series is somehow by the log line. So I hate to give you the it depends answer, but it kind of depends.
No, I actually think that that's a good answer, and I think it's the right answer. When I get queries, I think that if you are trying to pitch a pilot, then I should have the pilot logline. But if the pilot logline doesn't really explain the series, then you should also include the series logline. So it could be, you know, Dear Chris, I've written a TV pilot for series. The series pitch is logline for that. And my pilot is about logline for that. So it's it couldn't hurt. It couldn't hurt to give both.
Yeah.
Rick wants to know, I don't know if you want to talk, what screenplays would you recommend good and bad to read? And could you list 5 episodes of any type of TV show that you feel had fantastic writing that we should all watch?
As far as the screenplays, good and bad, I mean, I have honestly, Inside Pitch has hit some of my favorite writers already. I was somebody that used to go to the Austin Film Festival and see Shane Black and Scott Rosenberg. They were 2 of my favorites. And Chris McQuarrie, you can't go wrong with him either. And I've watched all 3 on Inside Pitch. So I'm big fans of those scripts. Instead of giving an answer, I'm going to waffle a little bit. But I'm a big fan of finding the latest like Blacklist scripts and just digging into those, because I think there's something to be said by the style, the voice, that I usually find some inspiration in. A lot of times if you just go and find like James Cameron's Aliens online, which I think is a fine script, it's a different thing because he was like the director. He was already hired. So there's something to be said. Like if you find this, if you read those Blacklist scripts, I think you'll find some things to take away from them. I tend to sample scripts when I go read. I like read chunks of them. I get the gist of the voice. I sometimes I'll only read like the first act, and I'll see what they're like. So anyway, I more promote that than to just say read this one, don't read this one. I can't even think of the ones I'd put like bad writing.
What about TV episodes or TV series?
Yeah, the TV episodes. I mean, I picked a lot of my favorites in the book. The Breaking Bad script is obvious. That's like that's the Chinatown of this day, you know, for screenwriters, and it's readily available online. Go check it out. I'm a big. I kind of broke down a lot of my favorite scripts. One of the ones that I really like is Barry. I was really impressed by the structure of that pilot. It hits a lot of the things I like because it mixes genres, but it still has some depth to it. And that's out there. You can go find that one. So they're two of many. I'm a big Shonda Rhimes fan, so I think Scandal is an excellent pilot if you want to read Scandal. Trying to think of the other. I'm trying to think of the actual scripts that I want you to read as opposed to like the shows that are broken down. It's funny because I've read some. Like there's one, and I wish I could remember the title.
You know, Jamie, you can later come back to this thread,
okay,
and add those specific titles when you.
Okay, good. Because it's funny. There's one that I can't remember the title to that a friend of mine sent me. It was like a TNT or a TBS show, and it was just when I read it, I was like, yeah, I have to be this good. It's really good. And the show ended up got produced. But I never even watched the show. You know, it's just like I just read this pilot and I was like, this is a really good pilot. And if I remember that one, I'm not sure that one's available though. That's why I'm hesitant to say it. But I can tell you the show if I remember what it is. But yeah, I'll come back to that one and give you some.
Yeah, good. And Ramesh, I think we have time for one more question because we're at the 2-hour mark. So let's.
Wow.
Okay.
Let's do one more question.
Let me see. Okay. Do you think, and he wants to know, do you think COVID/Zoom will alter the future requirement to be an LA-based writer room to work in TV? Like you have to be in LA to work in television now that we're sort of in a post-COVID world.
So I'm the perfect person to ask this question because I live in Baltimore, Maryland, or Ellicott City, Maryland, just near DC. I can tell you this. I took more general and pitch meetings last year. I did more pitches than I've ever done in my life. And nobody cared that I lived here at all. I took a couple room meetings even, or kind of general discussions for that. So I've never done that before. I've done generals and stuff, but I used to, every now and then, I used to fly in. I mean, that's what and I'll go back to that too. So I'll fly in for a week. I'll hit like 6 people a day. I'll fly out. It's a whole nightmare when I come in. But this year I did more meetings than I've ever done. I was doing them a couple a week. And I'd ask that question. I'd say, do you think, because I was doing a couple television pitches or generals based on pilots I wrote, and I asked them that very question. And many of them thought there would be opportunities for Zoom writing rooms. That's kind of the best answer I can give you because many of them anticipated they'd go back because it's going to be on a show-by-show basis. But I think, well, I still think it'll be 80%, you know, you have to be there. I do think there's going to be this weird niche 20%. There are actually a lot of writer rooms not too far from me in New York as well. It's kind of like the Kings, and there's some other ones that come out of there. And some of those are Zoom. And I think they might stay because they import people from LA and stuff like that. So anyway, I think it's going to change. I don't think it's going to be a massive landslide to everybody's Zoom. I still think you should be in LA if you want to write for TV, but it's changing. It's changing.
Yeah, you know, I would agree. I think that that where the idea never would have even been contemplated in the past was forced upon us. And while this will always be a business that is about face to face and like in the flesh kind of thing. If shows are working and you have writers that are all over the world right now meeting in a Zoom room, then who knows? There might be a real room where some of the writers in town are there and others aren't. I certainly think that shows will be more open to it. I think the industry is so much more open to it now, and there weren't a whole lot of good things that happened because of COVID. However, in our industry, I think the fact that we were forced to have to look at the world from a different place, cracking open that sort of, cloistered environment where everybody had to be here. And now maybe we'll be open up to it. So I hope that it means that there's more opportunities for writers to be able to be on staff. Look at actors now. Actors audition. They audition on their phone now, and they don't even have to go into a cattle call. So
yeah, a couple of my writers' room friends said the one place that they thought was going to stay this way was ADR. They said all the actors ADR from their house now with a decent setup, and they said they'll never go back to the regular ADR method because they can just do it from their house. That's a good thing. So I hope for all of you out there who are not in Los Angeles or New York that this will provide more opportunities. I certainly hope that Jamie's presentation today gave you a little more information. Clearly the book goes into all of these points in much greater detail. And at the very least, I hope that when you pitch your TV idea or pilot to me in the future, that I can hear Jamie's influence. So, Jamie, I want to thank you for being here. Mr. Ramesh, of course.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of our members, as always, for tuning in, for contributing to the group. We would have no group without you. So on that note, Save the Cat Writes for TV. You can find it on Amazon, and you can talk to Jamie in our group. So look for him on the Inside Pitch.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Yeah.